Welcome to the Untold Tales audio anthologies. Written by Mark Tiedemann and narrated by Melissa Del Toro Schaffner. The Peace of Unclaimed Genies. Shell's cabin was one room, the latrine and a closet just outside the back door at the northeast corner of her vegetable garden that a deer had been raiding lately. She had seen it a couple of times, but she could not bring herself to do anything about it other than curse. The room was adaptive, the walls bright and flexible. Shell had arranged it that morning with a low bench running along two walls and a skylight facing south. A table stood at the corner of the bench where she had set out a carafe of coffee and a plate of fruit and cheese from the printer. A book lay open on the table, but she had read only a short while before her gaze was caught by the view east, out the window above the veranda. From the porch, she would see only trees. The enhanced window, however, showed an unobstructed scene beyond the protective woodland. The land sloped down toward a grassy plain across which a road traced a path from north to south. In the distance, the horizon blued, fading into sky. She stared as if caught in a bubble of entropy. Movement, then far out, just a shift. Time broke, resumed. "Someone's coming," she said aloud. A bright tone shocked her out of stasis. She looked around, hands pressed down at her sides in preparation for flight. The tone sounded again, her calm, announcing an incoming call. She had almost forgotten what it was. "Speak," she said. "Shel Pasenik." The male voice sounded familiar. "Is this Shel Pasenik?" "It is," she said, throat tightening. "Never say yes. Yes is agreement. It binds." "This is Liam. Liam Regenis." "Liam? But he died, I thought." "How?" Shel said. "May I come see you?" "In person?" "That's usually what that means." "I don't do that," she swallowed. "I mean, I understand, but this is important." When Shel said nothing for several seconds, he added, "I am able to obtain a court order to require compliance. I would rather not. I believe you will find what I have to say beneficial." "You can't say what you need to this way?" "Over the comm? No." All she could think just then was how lucky he was not to be near her at the moment. "How did you find me?" "I haven't. All I have is your comm connection. Otherwise, I have no idea where you are." "Then that isn't you coming toward me?" "What do you mean?" "Someone is approaching my domicile." "I recommend you invite me." Shel ran through a list of reasons to say no. If he could obtain a court order, none of them would do. She wrestled with her feelings, which had not galloped around her psyche this way in years. "What do you want?" she asked. "To offer relief, something I believe you would be glad of." "Where are you calling from?" "I've taken a lease on the outskirts of Boulder." "A lease?" "You aren't the only one I'm trying to contact." "But you think you know my general location?" "Guesswork." "Do you know who's coming?" "Someone you do not wish to meet. I don't want to be more precise over the comm, please." She looked out at the landscape east of her cabin, aware of a stranger coming toward her. Something must have changed. She doubted the world would allow her to ignore it, as it had the last 3 years. Better to face it willingly than have it forced on her. "Very well. I'll have my dom send you location." "Thank you." The connection ended, and Shel waited for her heart to slow down. Why now? She thought. Things were finally becoming manageable. Shel found the rifle she had brought up here when she retired from everything. A custom-built hunting rifle, 22-250, with a scope and an engraved stock that had been fitted to her shoulder by the old gunsmith who had built it for her. Along with the weapon, he had provided her with a few hundred rounds of ammunition and the cleaning kit and a drive with complete instructions. She had used it once, to sight in, but but put it away when she realized she could not bring herself to kill game. The knowledge had come as a surprise. She had never been consciously opposed to hunting before, nor much of a food chauvinist. She had expected her antipathy toward people to extend to anything living, but deep down she could not bring herself to shoot birds or small animals, not even the deer that kept pillaging her garden, when their meat could be printed and tasted, she assumed, just as good as the so-called real thing. She went through the cleaning process quickly, reassembled the rifle, loaded it. The magazine held 5 rounds, and, oddly calm, exited the cabin to confront her visitors outdoors. A faint hum drew her gaze skyward. Soon, a flyer came into view, just over the canopy. It hovered above the patch of clear ground 20 meters from the dome, then settled down, blowing dust and leaves and small twigs around until the engine stopped. Shell's hands tightened on the rifle. The door swung upward and Liam stepped out. Shell had expected him to look older, but he was little different from 3 years ago. He stopped a few meters away, eyes on the rifle. "I'm not a threat," he said. "I didn't know which of you would get here first," Shell said. "The other one seems to be coming on foot." "Fair point. Do you get many intruders up here?" "You're the first." "After how many years?" She had to think which question to answer. 2. The last one was a migrant wandering through. I gave her food and never saw her again. "What may I do for you, Liam?" She looked past him at the car. "I don't see any official emblems." "It's my own," he said. "Causes less tension. I am with the Global Empathic Oversight Administration." "Ah, the Bone Company. I haven't heard that one in a while." "Neither have I. One of the reasons for coming up here." He nodded. "May I join you there, or do I stand here the whole time?" Shell debated with herself over how much hospitality to show him. They had not parted enemies, but there was still pain. She clicked the safety on. The sound was brittle in the otherwise still air. Rogenis's eyebrows rose. "Would you like some coffee?" she said. "Thank you." Inside, she propped the rifle beside the door, filled 2 cups, and carried them out. Rogenis was on the veranda. She handed him a cup, then retrieved the rifle. She set it next to the bench and sat down. "Have a seat," she said. He smiled and went to the far end of the bench. "I'm receiving nothing from you," he said, "just to let you know." Shell sipped coffee, watching him. "Something's changed?" "We can shut it all down." Her hand trembled at that. Coffee sloshed over the lip of the cup. "When did that happen?" she asked, setting the cup down and wiping her hand on her pants. "A little less than a year ago." "I didn't see anything, hear anything." She saw his expression. "I do check the networks occasionally. See if I'm missing out on something important. We've been rolling it out quietly. We don't want it to get out of hand, and we still want to monitor it for a while before it becomes too widely known." "Unlike last time?" "Oh, yes, very much so." Shell released a long, shuddering breath and fixed her gaze on the trees above Rogenis's vehicle. Her reactions were a jumble. A streak of anger cut through the confusion, the joy, the resentment, the antipathy, and the odd roil of indifference. She had been up here, away from people, for long enough to settle into her life again. Most days she managed to get through without crying or missing human company. She had found a way to live with the way things were. And now this man she had thought never to see again brought news that she could walk away from what she had achieved for herself. She wanted it, and she resented it, and she wished she did not know about it. "So," she finally said, "you came to see me for what reason?" Rogenis looked puzzled. "I should think that's obvious." "A cure, yes, but, I mean, why you? Why me? Anyone could have brought this. A stranger." "That would have been preferable." I don't know. I'm not even sure I want what you're offering. Any of it. Because it's me? Shell grunted. About you, of course. No, I know what you meant. When he was silent, she continued. That last day, remember? He reddened and nodded. Not my best self. No, but by then no one around me was. It's hard, realizing how toxic you can be. I lost just about everything because of this little plague. It's not a plague. No? What would you call it? Again, the embarrassed silence. Somebody somewhere thought it was a good idea. She could hear the sarcasm in her voice. To be fair, he said, it was never approved for general release. Shell stared at him until he looked away. So, he said, why'd you come up here? She laughed, a flat, bitter sound. Who needs a group facilitator that makes everyone uncomfortable? She wondered why he asked. He must have known. Surely he remembered his own reactions to her. But then maybe he never understood the underlying causes, only felt the effects. I became irrelevant. Mostly I worked remotely for a while, but that doesn't really work that well. No one missed me. She hesitated. No, that's not quite right. I didn't miss anyone. It gets old being shut out. Because whatever everyone around me was soaking in, I received none of it. I do not receive. I broadcast, though. She sighed heavily. Damn, did I broadcast? And no one liked it. You didn't. I thought it had malfunctioned and was broadcasting an incorrect aura. That would be nice, but no. It was extremely correct. It took about 4 months with a very expensive therapist to work that out. I was lucky to find one. I tried 4 before Beth, who was willing to put up with me until we figured out the problem. Imagine my surprise to learn that deep down, I really can't stand people. She laughed. I might have been able to correct it, but without feedback, you have nothing to work with. I was making everyone miserable with no way to know how to alter what I gave them. No way to know, until it's too late. You were the last straw. You chose an odd career for a misanthrope. We're not all the same, you know. In my case, I wanted to fix everybody. They could be fine. I was fine with them, as long as they took my direction. You were gone before I figured that out. Rogenis finished his coffee and set the cup down. What we have, what's been developed, is a damper. Well, it's more than that. Depending on how you use it, you can simply shut it all down. You won't project at all after. You'll be blank to anyone still active. Shell's pulse picked up. She did not want to be hopeful. She distrusted what was being offered. She might not like people, but that did not mean she did not want to be liked. Her eyes stung, and she looked away from him, into the greenery around them. She was grateful for his silence, allowing her time to regain control. It took longer than she thought it should. How? She began, coughed, then tried again. How are you rolling this out? Very carefully, one by one, in fact. You're looking for off-grid test subjects. Well, very compassionate. If it all goes wrong, who will know? We don't want another runaway cascade. So you already knew I was one of the fails. We knew something had gone wrong. We didn't know how or exactly what. He cleared his throat. You may not realize how many losses there have been. Losses? Dead. Murders or suicides? Both, and more. Some just gave up and went to sleep. We're still puzzling over those. Who could have guessed being more empathetic with each other has its drawbacks? It wasn't empathy, not with such complete access. Empathy is an act of imagination as much as anything else. Imaginative compassion? At least that's how I see it. Take away the imagination. He shrugged. Where have you been? Where'd you go afterward? The orbital platform. Later, they transferred several of us to the lunar colony. We served as controls during testing. Until a vaccine or something was developed? His jaw flexed. So, when you came back... Careful, someone said. Shell looked around, startled. The voice came from her right, out of the trees. He's gonna lie. None of 'em willingly tell the truth. Beside her, Rogenus leaned forward, hands pressed against his seat. Prepared, it seemed, to run. Who is he? She asked. You never mentioned his name. Before Rogenus could answer, the voice called out, My name is Cameron. Daryl Cameron. Pleased to make your acquaintance. Why are you here? Shell said. Hungry. I can spare some food. Not that way. He was still for a time. Your guest knows what I mean. He's probably warned you already. Shell glanced at Rogenus. He was sweating. He had not moved, it seemed, since the stranger had first spoken. Why don't you join us, Mr. Cameron? She said. I haven't had this much company in some time. Best maybe to get it all over at once and be finished. Rogenus shook his head, but remained voiceless. Minutes passed, and it seemed that Daryl Cameron had changed his mind, and Shell felt an old, almost unfamiliar twinge of disappointment. But then, a shape detached from a background of tangled vines, oak, and sumac, and stepped toward them. This is a mistake, Rogenus said. You're an official, aren't you? Shell said quietly. If he's a criminal, arrest him. It's not like that. I can't wait to see what it is like. Daryl Cameron approached cautiously. His eyes, deep-set and nearly black, shifted with predatory precision, and he walked with the care of someone expecting a trap. He was thin under loose clothes. The cloth was a chameleon fabric that matched the surroundings and gave him the shimmer of a mirage as he moved. His hat hung by a cord behind his back, revealing close-cropped blondish hair. He did not appear to be armed, but the back of Shell's neck tingled. She covered her ill ease with a final drink of coffee, draining her cup. She drew her rifle across her lap. Cameron stopped a dozen paces from the porch. Liam, he said, nodding. Rogenus nodded back. Did you hear what happened in Phoenix? I did, Rogenus said. Those 2 nurses will live, in case you're interested. Oh, I know that. I've never killed anyone. Some might debate that. That's all it would be, a debate. Shell stood. Obviously, you two have things to discuss. May I suggest you do so elsewhere? We haven't finished our discussion, Rogenus said, standing with her. I think we have. Rogenus reached inside his jacket. It was a slow move, nothing alarming, as if he were about to produce his ID. But he started twitching, hands still hidden. His teeth clenched, and his eyes rolled up. As quickly as it began, it ended, and he collapsed back onto the bench and then slid unconscious to the deck. Shell stared at him, startled. Then she looked back at Cameron, who was now holding a small object in his left hand. Birds called in the canopy. Did you kill him? Shell asked. Her heart hammered, but her voice was calm. She aimed her rifle at him. I hope not. That's murder. Cameron stepped forward and smiled. Just stunned. He'll be like that for a while. Calm, she told herself, remembering days around people. Her pulse slowed. Help me get him inside to the cot, she said. Why? He looks comfortable right there. Shell stared at him until he shrugged and stepped onto the porch. He bent down to grab Rogenus under the arms. She gestured with the rifle, and he dragged Rogenus into the dom. Cameron pulled him across the room to the bed, then, with more gentleness than Shell expected, lifted him onto the mattress. Sit down, she said. He looked around and moved to the kitchen area. He sat down in the chair by the table, arms still akimbo. I ain't here to hurt you, he said. You hurt him. Yeah, well, that's mutual. We've been hurting each other a while now. Put your weapon on the table, please." When he did not move, she said, "This fires hollow points. You won't have half your skull." For the first time, Cameron frowned, as if he were worried. He slowly took the stunner from his jacket and set it on the table, then pushed it, one-fingered, away. "Why didn't you stun us both?" Shell asked. "Only works one at a time. Has to recharge then. Besides, I wanted you awake." "Why?" "Experience. Feeling. You." "Not him? He can't give me what I want. Because he can't send." "That's right." "What about you?" "What about me?" "Do you send? Transmit?" "Nah, I just receive." Shell walked up to the table, keeping the rifle aimed at him. He looked puzzled for a moment, then alarmed when she snatched the stunner up. She glanced at it, locating the trigger, a moment before Cameron started to stand. She shot him with it. The device seemed to vibrate faintly. There was a pop, like a sudden air pressure drop, and he fell to the floor. Shell's lungs emptied in long shudders. She backed away from Cameron. She tucked the stunner in her waistband and then unloaded the rifle. She put the shells back in the cabinet and locked it. Rogenis was still unconscious. She gnawed a thumb knuckle while she considered what to do next. With a sigh of exasperation, she went through Cameron's pockets. She found his ID, a GPS locator, and a large multi-purpose tool. No other weapons. She did the same with Rogenis. More identification, one with a security mask overlay, so she could not read it. No weapons, but a small container, like an antique snuff box. A personal phone, 2 large handkerchiefs, unused. She carried the box back to the table, turning it over in her hands. Plain silver, no markings. The surface was rubbed to an uneven sheen from constant handling. She studied it carefully until she determined the mechanism, then pressed her thumb and forefinger against opposite edges. The lid eased open, revealing 3 silver ampules in a black lining. The cure Rogenis mentioned, or something else? Before she had moved off the grid, there had been rumors of clandestine teams spreading through communities, gathering data presumably. But as time and the infection went on, the story grew sinister, to include abductions, experiments, even murders. Shell never credited them. She knew such stories were self-generating and mostly baseless. The first years saw transformations in public reaction, too fast for rational response. Suicide soared. The numbers soon became classified. But as time went on, the gaps became obvious. People who were no longer there. Restaurants were less crowded. Theaters closed from lack of attendance. Whoever had created the nanobot had not considered that people might not want that degree of closeness. Second-guessing nature, or psychology, had produced mixed results. Again. Then there were the failures. Those for whom the infection did nothing, left them unchanged. But as a result, feeling more shut out and cut off than ever before. Watching everyone around them embracing the sudden pool of emotional access, or trying to run from it, huddles of people hugging or weeping or laughing, immersed in shared feelings. The unchanged, as they became known, not quite a pejorative, but in no way a neutral label, could only watch and wonder and know their isolation more intimately. But they were not the ones killing themselves, not in any greater number than ever before. No, it was the other kinds of failures, like Shell, who had come close to taking her own life after she understood the nature of her own transformation. And perhaps those like Cameron here, sprawled on her cabin floor. Rogenis moaned. Shell watched him as he came around. His left hand found his face and rubbed sloppily. He shifted, moaned again, then abruptly sat up. He blinked furiously, shook his head, and then saw Cameron on the floor. He looked around until he found Shell. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Physically, yes." Rogenis seemed puzzled and relieved at the same time. "What were you doing with these?" Shell asked, holding up the case of ampules. It's a counteragent. We can shut down the active colony, like I told you." Turn off my infection? Basically. Why 3? Rogenus said nothing. Shell sighed. Unless one of those will change who I am, I still have the same problem. The way things are now, people know and stay away. Rogenus managed to get to his feet. He wavered a little, recovered, then pulled a chair from the table to sit near Shell. She set the case of ampules on the side away from him. He frowned at them. Rogenus settled his gaze on Cameron. We need to shut it all down. You needed to have not done it in the first place. No argument. But you think it's right to do this? She gestured at the ampules. He looked confused. Undoing what? It's been 5 years since this first started. Wrong or not, people have begun to adjust. The world is different. Now you want to fuck with it all again? This is not communicable. Shell's laugh surprised them both. Not communicable, she said. That's rich. So much was not communicable before. And then it was, and the world changed. She shook her head. If you want to arrest him, do. Then leave. Take him with you. I'm fine. Alone. No one is fine alone. That's not your call. For the first time in a long while, Shell was furious about the battle going on in Rogenus's head. What is it he does? She asked, before he removed his composure. Rogenus glanced at Cameron and gave a small shake of his head. I absorb what others broadcast, Cameron said. He chuckled. Sorry, I've been listening to your little debate. Amusing. He sat up, right hand going to his neck. He groaned. So that's what it feels like, huh? He grinned at them. Don't let me stop you. For what it's worth, I sure don't want to be cured. Really? Shell said. Cameron's face fell slightly, uncertainty disturbing the confidence. Shell? Rogenus raised a hand as if to warn her. For a moment, Cameron looked surprised. Then his eyes closed, and he seemed pleased. Ah, yeah, he breathed. That's what I came for. The caution that centered her self-control over the last few years was difficult to abandon, but she let go. Little by little, the isolated matter of her feelings leaked out, finding old pathways, dried up but still traceable. She had forgotten the sensations, remembering by means of categories and tags. With no one else to direct them, it had been easier than she had expected to tuck them into the bags of former expression no longer used. But gradually, Cameron felt it, absorbed what she let out. He cleared his throat, frowning. Shell, stop! Rogenus pushed himself to his feet. She turned the stunner on him. It's you, Cameron said. He looked at Rogenus. You. What? Rogenus said. She. He aimed the finger at Shell. You did this. Shell was surprised when Cameron lurched across the room at Rogenus. Rogenus backed away and slapped at Cameron, who staggered to the floor. Rogenus looked confused, but stood wary and prepared for another attack. Cameron rolled over, breathing hard. Stop, he said, voice raspy. Shell, alarmed, tried to drag her feelings back into the recesses of her mind. Cameron sat up. Whoa, he said. Intense. Suddenly, he bent forward and vomited. Almost immediately, the floor began to absorb it. I need you to leave, Shell said. The two of you have issues. Deal with them somewhere else. Shell, No! She locked eyes with Rogenus. You just saw. There's no reason you can't come back. Rogenus took a step toward her. Cameron, from where he sat, twisted around and drove a fist into his groin. Rogenus screamed and folded over. Cameron scrambled over him, grabbed his hair, and punched him. Shell heard the snap ripple of bone. Rogenus fell silent and still. Cameron heaved himself off the floor, chest heaving. He looked at Shell. Nothing. Rogenus lay still on the floor, a trickle of blood now seeping from the corner of his mouth. Shell's surprise faded, leaving only a dull curiosity. She looked at Cameron. She was annoyed at his presence, mildly resentful, and wished him gone. She knew that was not enough, that she should be feeling much more than impatience. All she wanted was the solitude she had accepted as the only fair, the natural consequence of what the plague had left her. The only thing I'm now suited to, she thought. Briefly, abruptly, she hated. A hot spike, unexpected, erupting, complete, lancing the long-festering boil of revulsion she had been carrying, ignoring, pretending was just an occasional bad day instead of a chronic condition. It had taken her years to construct a life of acceptance and apartness, managing an accommodation with the self-honesty that had been forced on her. Gone now, so fast. Cameron moaned, a desolate, sickening sound. Shell turned to see him huddled on the floor, face pale. Suddenly, Rogenus moved. He was on Cameron in an instant, an ampule pressed into the man's neck. He scrambled back then, and Cameron glared at him, face flushing, eyes wide. "What did you do?" Shell said. Rogenus panted, sweat beading his forehead. He glanced down at his hand and the empty ampule. He laughed breathily. "Maybe I fixed him." His speech was slurred. He wiped at his mouth and frowned at the blood on his hand. Shell raised the stunner. "What?" Rogenus said. "Wait, that man has been feeding off the uncontrolled emanations of anyone he came into contact with. Worse, he'd intentionally manipulate them to increase the output. He's a leech, a vampire." "You're just being a good Van Helsing?" "Shell! You used me! Bait!" When he did not deny it, she wished for a moment that he could receive. "Leave! Take him with you!" "We're trying to put the genie back in the bottle," he said. "Did you think maybe the genie has changed since it got out? It might not fit in the bottle anymore." He frowned at her, a trace of doubt in his eyes. He sighed. He held up the box. "Two left. Carotid artery. It shuts down the colony." He placed it on the table. "Your choice." "You didn't answer me. Why 3? "Usually there's more than one person involved." He struggled then to get Cameron out the door and down the steps. A few minutes later, she heard his vehicle lift off and speed away. She picked up the box. Would it be any worse? She wondered. She took one of the ampules from the box and held it up to the light. It was opaque. Nothing from within to betray its contents. She did not give it a second thought. The motion begun, seen through, the ampule pressed against her neck. It felt cool, then briefly hot, wet. Immediately after, the thought came to her. I will never be used that way again. She felt nothing. Shell went outside. The forest shifted around her. Sibilants and small rattles. A breeze touched her. Slowly, she walked around to check her garden. The deer was back. It raised its head at her approach, paused, then bolted off. Later, after reloading the rifle, she went out by a tree and sat down to wait. She had not tasted venison in years. Thank you for listening. We love our listeners, fans, patrons, and supporters. We'd like to hear from you and let us know what you think. The best way to do that is to subscribe on our website, untold-tales.com. We want to make sure that we are creating stories and an experience that you're enjoying. So subscribe on our website. That'll put you on our email list. Again, thank you for listening and have a wonderful day.